And now we turn back to the man who led U.S. forces through the first Gulf War. General Norman Schwarzkopf is standing by. General, good to see you again. Thanks for being with us.
Right, John.
It feels again like a calm before the storm. How does the timing work on something like this?
Well, you know, we got to make sure the troops are in place in their attack positions. We got to make sure the logistic supplies that they need to sustain themselves are in position also, and all of that takes time. There's a lot of desert out there, and they've got to spread the troops out in the desert, put them in their attack positions, get the munitions there. As I said in the Gulf War, just to supply the troops that we sent out west, it was 36 million gallons of gasoline and 115 tons of ammunition that we had to have in place so that we could sustain the operation once it kicked off.
Now, when you take all this information in, you've got to consider weather, you've got to consider timing and your plan. If something doesn't go as planned, then how do you must have other plans backed up in line for all these contingencies. You have to figure out what the situation is. In fact, I guess you ran into that in the last Gulf War.
Yeah, you always do that. You know, your plan is actually your plan is the thing that applies at that particular minute. We always say the planning is done, it's the mission, the enemy, the troops available, and the terrain, and all of those things must be considered, but any one of them can change as you go ahead and execute your plan. So if your enemy does something that you didn't expect them to do, then you have to be ready to adjust your plan to accommodate that. But by and large, the initial plan, the one that's probably going to kick off here, is one that's been very, very well established. It's been practiced by everyone. They know exactly what it is they need to do when the time comes.
On the air, in the beginning, we heard this was going to be not just an air campaign, but an air campaign and a devastating ground campaign as well. You think that's going to stay the same? Is that the plan you're expecting?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about the fact that we're going to use the air to soften up targets, to accomplish. I'm sure there's a set of objectives, many of which they want to accomplish purely with the air, and once those objectives are accomplished, that opens the door for the ground troops to do what it is that they need to do. So the two fit hand in glove, and you can't. One of them is fine by itself, but together they become a devastating attack.
You hear so many families say, "I hope this war is over quickly." You hear the soldiers say, "We want to get in there so we can get this thing over," and you can understand why they say that. But President Bush warned the American people in some ways last night that it may not be as quick as we'd hoped. It may not be a 5-day war or a 2-week war. What is your estimate of that?
Well, that's almost anybody's guess. I don't have the war plans available to me. Obviously, there's a succession of objectives that have to be accomplished. Things that we hope will come about as a result of our attacks, and depending upon how they come about is going to determine how quickly we're able to get this whole thing over with. I think it's way premature to say, okay, it's going to take a matter of time. You know, we thought that the Gulf War, when we finally kicked off the ground phase, might take as many as 3 or 4 weeks, and of course it took 100 hours. So a lot of that depends upon how the enemy is going to stand up against you, or whether they're just going to collapse. And by the way, these are the same troops we fought then, so I have no expectations that they're going to do a stellar performance of the enemy in the field. I think that we should be able to accomplish our objectives rather quickly.
Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say it's a different objective. And the last time, you know, we weren't going to go all the way to Baghdad, and this time we have to go all the way to Baghdad to accomplish what we said we're going to accomplish. So that's a different campaign in its entirety.
Some of them did collapse, and some of them had been out there in the desert for a long time, and they were hungry and hot and tired, and they turned themselves into U.S. forces. Is the situation can't be any better this time, can it?
No, and I think you're going to see the same thing. I don't think you're going to see a determined defense by anybody other than maybe the Republican Guards, and not even the Republican Guards, because they turned and ran at the end of the ground campaign. But you know, we captured 80,000 enemy prisoners of war during that 100 hours of the war. And that's a huge number of people who just gave up and said they didn't want to have anything more to do with it. But that was also after a 39-day preparation where they were bombed on a regular basis and had to dig themselves deep in and never knew whether they were going to be alive the next minute or not. So they were pounded pretty hard or not pretty hard, they were pounded very, very hard before we kicked off the ground attack.
But it still gives you an idea what U.S. troops can do. General Schwarzkopf, as always, thanks very much.
You're very welcome.